Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Provocations, Conversations, Iterations series. This is part of the ongoing Provocations Project, which is facilitated by Jessica Rajko, John MacCallum, and myself, Teoma Naccarato. And presently, the Provocations Project is actually a track at SlowMoco, which is the extended format of the Conference on Movement and Computing. So this project began a couple of years back, and we put out 2 different calls for provocations on different questions. And presently, in this context, we'll be discussing the question of what aspects of your practice or research are invisible to your collaborators. And we've invited here today some provocateurs, those who have submitted provocations in response to this question. Provocations can take many forms: text, images, video, etc. But the idea here is that we wanted to bring the provocateurs here to share and discuss their provocations in relation to one another. We're revisiting some provocations from back in 2019 when the call was originally launched. We're also looking at some provocations that are much more recent in the context of SlowMoco right now. So we are thrilled to have here with us today Manjunan Gnanaratnam, Evelyn Ficarra, and Josh Slater and Shelley Owen, who actually have submitted a collaborative provocation to share together. We're going to begin with Evelyn, so I will hand it over.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be involved. My first submission to this line was an image of myself, which I think you can see online, and it's a very blurry image of myself. And I did an image because I really couldn't think about what to say. And so I thought the image would kind of encapsulate the idea of it being hard to see each other sometimes, or perhaps like it being fun to hide from each other in some ways. So, but this time I thought I would try to put into words my sort of discomfort and ambivalence around this provocation. So the question is, what is invisible to your collaborator? When I first thought about this question, my initial response was, well, not much. This is because one of my primary collaborators is also my life partner. We work together often in the same room for hours on end, and we see every stage of each other's process. What could possibly be invisible? Then I thought about how maybe there were things that were invisible because I wanted them to be, and how thorny it would be to say that out loud, things that might be invisible, and whether that would be a sign of problems with our relationship, and whether this would be the correct forum to expose those things if they existed, and whether it wouldn't rather be better to talk to my collaborator about that first before being recorded and put online. Then setting those thoughts aside for a while, I thought about many other collaborations I've had in the past, some of which are continuing now. And then I thought that in order to answer this question, what is invisible to your collaborator, one would have to be very specific about which collaborator one was talking about, because every collaboration is different. And you would have to give them a pseudonym because you might be saying things about them that weren't complimentary, and because collaborator X was a terrible listener and collaborator Y literally crossed out parts of my score with a pencil, and collaborator Z didn't want to collaborate at all. They just wanted me to help them realize their own vision, etc., etc. Yeah. Okay, and then maybe there's a sneaking suspicion that I'm actually a terrible collaborator too, and who am I to talk? And then I thought, really, to find out what is invisible to my collaborator, you'd have to ask my collaborator, because how could I possibly know what they see or do not see? And then I thought that would be even more ridiculous because it's invisible, so they can't see it. And how would they know what it is? So it seems to me that the real answer to this question, what is invisible to your collaborator, is unknown. Unless you're going to get the collaborators together in a room and have each one say what they think is invisible to the other, and have the other one say, no, I see that, I've always seen that, or, oh really, I never saw that, and how amazing. I can't do that right here with you all because I've never collaborated with any of you before, but I'm looking forward to hearing Josh and Shelley talk. So maybe what we can really do in response to this provocation is to make a list perhaps like this. List number 1, make a list of things which we hope are invisible to our collaborators. Number 2, a list of things which we would like to know about our collaborators. 3, a list of things, the knowing of which helps collaborators to collaborate with each other. And I'll pass on now to Josh and Shelley. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you. So it's the before moments the moments we experience individually whilst together in our practices before sharing artwork, the personal rituals, the preparations to anticipate the moment of sharing. Working collaboratively, we're aware of these before moments, whilst inhabiting the shared physical space. We work through our own rituals at the same time in the same location, aware of their external readings. But the internal intentions and processes remain hidden from each other.
Work the body intensely to ground in that space. Feel the body and gain control. Focus.
Pause. Breathe deeply. Find light and air in a different space outside this space, ready to re-enter.
Digitizing collaboration gave us a realization of the individual and invisible nature of these moments. The distance collaboration across new digital platforms offered different processes to connect and develop. In a digital space, the independent before moments felt isolated and alone, lacking an external felt presence. The internal intentions are always invisible to each other, but digitally, this was so much more profound. And what about the before moments of collaborators who contribute at earlier stages of the process? Thank you. I'll hand over to Mandy.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here. Outside of dance, in other artistic contexts, many aspects of my practice as a musician and technologist in dance contexts would be considered as invisible. Yes, however, 21st century dance, in the early stages of a symbiosis encompassing its inherent multidisciplinary identity, based on its rigorous 20th century collaborative investigations rooted in movement vocabulary and somatics, expects it. Here, the details of my tools and processes in music and technology/computation are mostly irrelevant. But my scope of abilities, possibilities, and investigations with said tools and processes in 21st century dance context are expected in all facets of dance. Beyond the situational collaborations to a seamless symbiosis, to the ritual of a singularity, from the ancient to the new, the Gaia.
That makes me think of situations in which I felt like some collaborators feel that music is a sort of secret magic thing, and it's hard for them to understand really what's going on. And I realize that most of my close collaborators, that's not the case, either because they're musicians too in some way, or because the work we do is devised work and somehow they see the process at close hand. But yeah, I don't know. Many years ago, I was asked if I wanted to be in a television production about composers, and they said they would come and film me composing. And at that stage, I was doing a lot of like just I was sitting at my desk or computer and mostly like writing notes. And I said, there's really nothing to see. And I can't really play the piano, or there's not much to listen to at this stage either. So I don't know. I wonder if people feel like aspects of the people's work that they collaborate with, is there some kind of mystery or magic to that still, or do you feel like you have access to all the nuances?
I think there's something really interesting about that mystery and magic, and really resonated with kind of Shelley and I. We've been collaborating for 4 years in many different kind of ways, probably 5 years now. I've probably shortened that. 6, I've shortened that by 2 years. Yeah. Not good with dates, but I think that when we shifted into we've always been really, really present with each other in the physical space. But when we shifted into something that was more digital, we kind of realized the mystery that was there, but it was an unspoken mystery when we were in the space, but we had to speak about that mystery when we weren't together to check that it was still happening, because we couldn't clock those visual moments that are happening. You know, I can see you doing your ritual before a performance in the same way that I'm doing my ritual, even though we're entirely separate. But if you're not in that space, or even sharing those moments, we had a moment of going, did that feel weird, you not being in the same space when we were doing that? Like, you still did the usual thing you do, so we had to kind of check in with the things that we're so used to, that have become habits in our collaboration, particularly in those moments just before performances for us. But it was a nice moment to realize that there's still a mystery there, and it's not that I need to ever know what it is that's going through Shelley's mind in those before moments, but just to know that it's going through her mind, because it's going through my mind in a different way. And yeah, and that's, I think, down to habit and kind of the physical presence in spaces that have obviously been shifted so much over the past, 18 months or so.
If I may ask, Josh and Shelley, both of you are movers, both dancers, are both of you dancers?
Yes, yeah. So I'd say that's the main practice, definitely.
That would be.
Yeah. And we've both collaborated a lot with musicians and in improvisation, and composers in creating works in really different and a variety of different ways. So stuff that's instant composition, as well as more kind of a longer process of developing a composition to match with pieces of movement or dance. Yeah.
I'm thinking even when we have worked in those longer kind of stretched out processes with musicians or composers, they've, generally speaking, have always been in the physical space with us. So we're seeing them noodle away, they're seeing them set up their equipment, we're seeing all of this stuff. So it's kind of apart from, again, the processes that they're going through as individuals with their own practices or their own way of working, their rituals, a lot of what is happening is still visible to us, I'd say. And it's only when we're working remotely through digital means and remotely with sound artists that we've lost that level of kind of visibility in the way that we work together, I'd say.
I just sort of wanted to reflect on, for me, I only work with dance, and it seems the longer I work with dance, it keeps me in, because my work as a musician isn't a novelty for dance and as a technologist. But when I meet others from other mediums, my work that is not a novelty should be considered as a novelty or as something new. And this is where I find the dichotomy, that it seems like dance has negotiated many aspects of its multidisciplinary identity years ago. And they are much more comfortable with a musician coming into their space, as opposed to a dancer going into a musician's space. Simply by the identity, the nature of that music exists hand in hand with dance. And hence my work only with dance, simply because I'm at home there. And but when I do talk to musicians about dance, there are much more questions about, well, isn't it a novelty for you, as it is for, say, musicians who are working with dance as a new concept? But for me, it's not. And that's where I reflect on that, where within dance, what I'm capable of is not a novelty or a show and tell moment. It's what he does. But when I'm outside of dance as a musician, they say, oh, you use Connect and you use motion mocap, and wow, that's amazing. And well, it's really not in a dance context where it's normal. It's now considered a normal facet of working with movement. So that dichotomy is what I begin to see in my work and outside of my work, where I don't stick my nose outside anymore. Yes.
It was interesting for me working on the provocation because I realized how I was focusing on the issue of the relationship between myself and the collaborators more than between the different disciplines, if you like. And I think part of that is that I do collaborate with my partner and I do collaborate with very close friends. So so it's a very kind of all entwined area. And it just so happens that that has continued, and that I do also collaborate with people I don't know that well, but more I'm collaborating with people I do know really well. For some reason, that's just how it worked out. So I feel like the relationship is really important. And hearing you talk, Manju, is so interesting because I really chime with that, the idea that you're in a situation where people understand your discipline. And I feel that very strongly with dance as well.
Yeah.
And I feel it even more strongly now that I've become very interested in and passionate about improvisation. So I have a collaborator that I have a couple of really amazing improvisers that I get together with, well, when I can, which hasn't been much lately. But and it does feel like we're doing the same thing, even though I'm just making sounds and that other person is just moving. It feels like we're doing the same thing, which is really interesting. And then when I collaborate more with filmmakers and video, it also feels like we're doing the same thing because we're both sitting at our computer the whole time. So it's like the process is really similar. So the idea that something would be invisible was a harder, like it must be to do with the relationship rather than the discipline itself, somehow.
It reminds me of a story. I was very lucky to see this a musician, an old dance musician from New York, 60s and 70s, Marjorie Lance Mark DeLewis, improvise. And she improvised. It was a dance and a music conference. And I've known her for decades and finally got a chance to see her play. And she improvised. And then during the reception later on, I had the courage to go up and ask her, knowing my question could be a dumb question. And I asked her, when you were improvising, were you thinking of movement vocabulary? And she, knowing where we are at, turned to me and said, what do you think? And I just walked away humbled, reminded and humbled. Yeah. So
I think there's something really, that story is beautiful, by the way, but there is something really interesting and in the experiences that I've had working with musicians or digital artists and movement, and understanding that there is so much common ground, but really viewing things from different kind of pathways in, and the value within those moments have always become really profound and aren't necessarily really visible to begin with. Those kind of moments of seeing things through a different discipline's eyes, but a discipline that's also someone that is very leans towards the discipline that I might be working from or has got a lot of experience within that. And I think keeping those slight faint kind of boundary lines of disciplines so that we're able to see things from different angles from those experiences and not kind of remove those boundaries in their entirety, I think has been really useful in collaborative processes, and I think connects to relationships still, because there's that sense of, when there's a collaborator from a different discipline that is able to find common language but still bring themselves to it, bring their experiences, bring their processes and their histories, which are often very invisible to everybody else in the room in those moments, which I think is really exciting, but can often go wrong as well.
I think having similar processes is really visibilizing, if you like. So I think of a filmmaker I worked with back in the 90s, and the thing that drew us together initially, apart from just kind of we loved each other's work, was that we had the same process. We were both collectors and editors. I would collect sound, she would collect images, and we would create meaning by the way we were stringing them together and making phrases and so on. And so the collaboration just worked like a dream because we were both completely understanding each other's language from that kind of how you put things together sort of way. So when I think of times when I felt more kind of invisible, and you know what has been invisible, it's been more that there's been a disjunct in that way, that the working methods aren't really matching up, and it's more like, okay, I have to go away by myself and produce something and then bring it to that person who then uses it in some way. Don't know if anyone has had that experience in collaborations.
I mean, I think Evelyn, in this and earlier you brought up this really interesting idea that, you know, how can we state what is invisible to our collaborators, or how could they also state that back to us if it's invisible to them? And I think a sort of question that might be coupled with that is what is invisible to us inside of our own collaborations. Calling into question right away the idea that invisibility is bad. There might also be some value in this. And I saw this to some extent, Josh and Shelley, in your suggestion and sort of valuing of these before moments of the collaboration, which to an extent sort of ask us, well, what's the boundary of this collaboration? Where does it begin and end and flow between personal and professional and between one discipline and another discipline? So I'm hearing a lot of examples kind of like this, but I wonder if you might speak a little more to how these sort of collaborations spill or expand at the seams in ways that challenge ideas of visibility and invisibility.
I think that it's a great question. I was thinking the same thing, in the sense that we often, by making something invisible, it could be seen as a negative, and feeling invisible, I think, absolutely is a negative if you feel invisible. But if the work is happening invisibly from each other, but it's happening because you're very connected or you're very in tune with each other, and therefore it's an unspoken thing that is invisible in a, you know, a really kind of conducive, good kind of process. But I think for Shelley and I, and Shelley, tell me if I'm speaking for you too much, but we've really shifted our different ways into our collaborations. So almost in every different project, we tend to take different roles in that collaboration. So one of us might be the lead within kind of the lead project kind of that one, or it might be the other's project, or it might be a project that we've generated together. So we're always trying to shift the roles within the collaboration to almost tease out those invisibilities and to work out where we kind of lean more into as individuals, but also as this coupling that we've had for a number of years. But I think there's been some really kind of clear times that, you know, we're very, very good friends, and that has come because of collaborating, because of those moments of working, you know, and we've always lived a good few hundred miles away from each other. So there's always been an invisible kind of wheel turning in the background for both of us to ensure that those moments when we are physically in the space, when we're visible to each other in the space, to make those moments happen. And that has always been a positive thing, but is always inevitably spilt out into the personal, because those moments that we're catching as an artistic or product-based collaboration is always a moment of catching up socially, or a moment of developing our personal relationship with each other as friends. So yeah, it blurs all the time because we're trying to kind of magnify those moments that are often short-lived in the physical space together to serve many different purposes that will be visible to some people and invisible to others, and each other in that, and they shift every time. If that's me describing it well enough, Shelley, please feel free to.
I think it is. You've captured it perfectly, and I'd say that it's that kind of that moving and shifting around the roles within projects, or the roles within the collaboration, and taking the different approaches. I don't feel it's ever been organized or predetermined. There's a couple of occasions, you know, one of us is commissioned for something, so we bring in the other, like that. But majority of the time it feels quite natural that we've flowed through the different kind of different roles and relationships, and that I think has been made even more possible because of the blurring, the massively blurred lines between professional and personal relationship within our collaboration. So yeah, with it being so open and fluid, has enabled us to shift within that really easily and organically, which has been, I think, a positive in sustaining our working relationship for 6 years, which isn't a huge amount of time, but it's a lot has happened in that time. So yeah, I think having the kind of, it's the fluidity that's enabled that, and not being too rigid.
So I have 3 questions, or maybe one question with 3 parts. This is for Shelley and Josh. I'm always curious with dance collaborators about how much they know each other and in what context, because I can see the magic, so to speak. And I've always been curious about the old stories of Cage and Cunningham having been life partners, personally, life partners as well as professional partners. And when they came up with indeterminacy and chance operations and all, and so on and so forth, I wondered how much could that be really true when you live together? They live together. And so when I ask the questions about if I've lived with dancers, and when you live with dancers, you begin to know dance in ways that you wouldn't know dance if you didn't live with dancers. Because dancers tend to live dance even when they're not moving. They talk, their instrument is their body, and they talk about their bodies, which you file away. So my question to the 2 of you is, 6 years, have you lived together? Have you been very close friends? Do you have a mutual group of friends that you hang out with, spend time with? And how did it start? How did your relationship begin? If you don't mind me asking.
It started 2015 when Josh came to work as a dancer on a project that I was doing for the National Trust. So that we didn't know each other before that point, before that moment. So it started as a very clear professional relationship for a specific project. And then what happened after that, I have no idea. We couldn't escape each other. I think something, and do correct me, Josh, if I'm wrong, but I think it felt quite, we understood each other in a way. I understood, Josh kind of got what I was getting at professionally. And there was just something, we seemed to have quite a bit in common, and it just flowed from there. So fast forward over the 6 years, and we've never lived together. We spend blocks of time together, so I'll quite often be visiting and staying with Josh and socializing, and drinking lots of wine, but we've never lived together or spent kind of prolonged periods of time together beyond maybe a week in one block. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question at all, but
no, it does. Dancers, they live in their instrument. And to me, I don't think they're done performing or practicing dance, even when they're not on stage. They live the instrument. And I've always, for 40 years, I've been curious about that. So it's been a long, so I'm curious when I meet partnerships, I ask these questions.
I think as well, the way that a lot of the work that Josh and I do together is kind of heavily involves improvisation or instant composition quite heavily. So the way that we would navigate the stage together if we're performing is a similar way that we would navigate the room together if we're socializing, so by spending time around each other in a social context, you can kind of pick up on sensing the way that somebody moves or the cues of how they're processing information in the space that they're in, that then reflects quite directly to the way that we would negotiate and process information in a performance setting, simply because of the composition that we do. Yeah.
Good. I like it.
I appreciate how this has shifted this sort of parallel discussion between professional, personal, and also between dance and music or different disciplines. So I feel like the scope here, the boundaries of what constitutes collaboration have really come to the foreground. So thank you all so much. We would love to continue the conversation, but we will have to do so via other means. For example, in the Slow Moco Discord, we have our conversations continuing. And we will invite you to some ongoing events. The provocations from each of you will be posted along with this video for people to reference. And yeah, we just want to thank you once more again for taking part in this event.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all.